The arrival of the alien queen. The Earth trembled as the massive spaceship descended from the sky. It was not like the usual human spacecraft. This one was dark, sleek, and terrifyingly large. Its surface shimmered with strange, alien energy, and as it landed in the secured military base, all human personnel stood frozen in awe. The HFY, one of the most feared and advanced alien races in the galaxy, had arrived. From the center of the ship, a massive door hissed open, releasing a cold mist into the air. Then she stepped out. Queen Zorith, ruler of the HFY Empire. She was tall, 8 feet of pure alien dominance. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, shimmering slightly under Earth's sun. Her eyes glowed golden, sharp, and intelligent, scanning the humans before her with quiet amusement. A long, armored robe covered most of her powerful body, but her strong posture made it clear. She was no ordinary visitor. She was a conqueror. The human soldiers around her tightened their grip on their weapons, though they knew it was useless. The HFY were far more advanced, their technology decades ahead of Earth's. If they wanted to take over, no human force could stop them. But Zorith had not come to conquer. At least, not in the way they feared. The meeting. A team of diplomats and scientists had been waiting inside the large facility nearby. Among them was Dr. Ethan Hayes, a xenobiologist who had spent years studying alien physiology. He had been chosen to observe the Queen and understand her species better. As Zorith entered the facility, all eyes turned to her. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, her golden eyes scanning the small human figures around her. They were weak, fragile, pathetic. She had seen them before in holographic data, but now, up close, they looked even smaller than she expected. How had such a weak race survived in the galaxy for so long? A human official stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, welcome to Earth," he said. "We are honored by your visit." Zorith tilted her head slightly. Her voice, deep and powerful, echoed through the hall. "I did not come for honor. I came for knowledge." Her words sent a chill through the room. Ethan, watching closely, felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. The Queen was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her presence was overwhelming. A true apex predator in humanoid form. As the meeting continued, she answered questions with short, direct replies. She spoke of the HFY's vast empire, their superior technology, and their philosophy of strength over emotion. One thing became very clear. The HFY did not believe in love, the mockery of human love. At one point, Ethan found himself sitting across from Zorith in a private discussion chamber. It was meant to be a scientific exchange, but it felt more like an interrogation. "You humans," Zorith said, her golden eyes fixed on him, "you base your lives on foolish things. You waste time on emotions. Love, affection, attachment, weakness." Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused. "You don't believe in love." Zorith smirked. "Love is an illusion, a distraction. In my empire, we select the strongest genes for reproduction. There is no need for weak emotional attachments. No need for mating rituals." Ethan chuckled. "That's sad. Love isn't just about reproduction. It's about connection, about trust, about..." Zorith leaned forward, her towering figure making him feel insignificant. "Tell me, human," she said in a low, almost mocking voice, "do you truly believe that your little romantic gestures have any power? That your mating customs mean anything?" Ethan smirked, refusing to back down. "I do. And if you don't, then why do you sound so interested?" For the first time, Zorith hesitated. It was only for a second, but Ethan caught it. The challenge. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Maybe you're just scared to admit that emotions make you stronger, not weaker." Zorith's expression hardened. Emotions make creatures vulnerable. The weak die, the strong survive. Ethan tilted his head. "And yet, humans survive. Despite our weakness, we thrive. Maybe there's more to love than you think. Zareth laughed, a deep, rich sound that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. It was not a pleasant laugh. It was mocking. You amuse me, human, she said. Your kind has much to learn. Ethan shrugged. So do you. Zareth studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, she rose to her full height and left the chamber. Ethan watched her go, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time they had this conversation. Something told him the Queen of the HFY was about to learn a lesson she never expected. The challenge begins. The night was quiet, but Zareth's mind was not. She stood alone in the observation deck of her ship, staring down at Earth. The human world spun slowly below, covered in lights, oceans, and something far more dangerous, emotions. She had meant to forget the conversation with Dr. Ethan Hayes, to erase his foolish words from her mind. But they lingered. His challenge, his confidence, his ridiculous belief in love. It irritated her. No, it bothered her. For the first time in her life, an inferior creature had dared to look her in the eye and challenge her reality. Zareth clenched her fists. Weak creatures do not challenge queens, she muttered to herself. And yet, he had. A game of curiosity. The next morning, Zareth did something unthinkable. She sought out Ethan. She found him outside the research facility, drinking a cup of that strange human beverage, coffee. He sat under a tree, looking perfectly at peace. He did not stand when she approached. He did not bow. He did not show fear. He just looked up at her, his small human form completely at ease beneath her towering presence. You're staring, Ethan said casually, taking a sip of his coffee. Zareth narrowed her glowing golden eyes. I do not stare. I observe. Ethan smirked. Same thing. Zareth hated his confidence. It was unnatural. Humans should fear her. And yet, here he was, acting like an equal. She folded her arms. You think love is strength? Ethan nodded. I don't think. I know. Zareth scoffed. Prove it. Ethan leaned forward, interested. Prove what? Zareth tilted her head. Prove that emotions are not weakness. Prove that your kind's obsession with mating is anything more than a pathetic distraction. Ethan's smirk grew. You want me to teach you about love? Zareth's jaw tightened. Not love. I want to understand the human mind. Ethan chuckled. That's a dangerous thing to study, Your Majesty. Zareth didn't flinch. I do not fear danger. Ethan's smile faded slightly. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for something. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. All right, he said. Let's start with something simple. Human touch. Ethan reached out his hand. Zareth frowned. What is this? It's called a handshake, he said. It's a greeting, a sign of trust. Zareth stared at his hand as if it were a weapon. Ridiculous. Ethan didn't move. Are you scared? Zareth's golden eyes flashed with irritation. Scared. She, a Xenfar queen, afraid of a human's touch. With a low growl, she extended her large, clawed hand and gripped his. And then, something strange happened. His hand was warm. Soft, but firm. Strong in a way she had never considered. For the first time in her life, Zareth felt something unexpected. Not fear, not battle rage, not dominance. Something else. A strange hum of energy passed between them. Zareth quickly pulled her hand away, eyes narrowing. This experiment is meaningless. Ethan grinned. Then why do you look confused? Zareth turned sharply and walked away. She didn't answer. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. The game continues. For the next few days, Zareth observed human interactions more closely. She watched as couples laughed together. She watched as parents held their children. She watched as humans touched, smiled, and stayed close to each other, for no logical reason. And the worst part, Her body reacted every time she thought about it. Every time she thought about him. The jealousy she did not understand. Zareth was still processing her confusion when she saw something that made her angry. Ethan was sitting at a table, talking to another human woman. A scientist. She laughed at something he said. She touched his arm. Zareth felt something inside her tighten. Her chest burned. Her breathing deepened. Was this anger? She hated this feeling. It was weak. It was irrational. And yet, before she could stop herself, she marched across the room, towering over Ethan and the woman. Ethan blinked up at her. Your Majesty." Zareth ignored him and stared directly at the woman. "You will leave now," she said coldly. The woman, clearly terrified, quickly excused herself. Zareth then turned back to Ethan, her golden eyes burning. Ethan, instead of looking scared, grinned. "Queen Zareth," he said, amused, "are you jealous?" Zareth's hands clenched into fists. "Senfar do not feel jealousy." Ethan leaned back, still smirking. "Then why are you acting like it?" Zareth had no answer. She hated this human. She hated his questions. She hated his stupid, arrogant smirk. But most of all, she hated that he was right. The forbidden experiment. Zareth was losing control. She hated that feeling. She was a queen, a ruler of one of the most advanced and feared species in the galaxy. She had commanded armies, destroyed fleets, and made entire planets kneel before her. And yet, here she was standing in front of a human, feeling something she couldn't name. Something dangerous. She needed answers. She needed control. And so she made a decision that would change everything. The experiment begins. The research lab was quiet, except for the soft hum of the machines. Ethan was working late, scanning data on a glowing holoscreen. He didn't notice Zareth until her massive shadow fell over him. He turned, unsurprised. Couldn't sleep. Senfar didn't need sleep, but Zareth ignored his comment. Instead, she crossed her arms and spoke in her usual commanding tone. "I have decided to conduct an experiment." Ethan raised an eyebrow, interested. "Oh, on what?" Zareth met his gaze. "On you." Ethan blinked. Me?" Zareth nodded. "You claim that human emotions make you strong, that your mating bonds are more than just distractions." She took a step closer, her golden eyes burning into his. "I will test this." Ethan smirked. "You want to study human love." Zareth scoffed. "Do not mock me, human." Ethan leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying this too much. "And how exactly do you plan on testing it?" Zareth hesitated. She had not thought that far ahead. In her mind, this was a simple mission. Observe, analyze, and prove that emotions were a weakness. But now, standing in front of him, with his irritating confidence and warmth, she realized something terrifying. She had no idea what she was doing. Ethan, as if sensing her hesitation, tilted his head. "You don't know, do you?" Zareth's jaw tightened. "Of course I do." Ethan grinned. "All right then, let's begin. I'll be your test subject. What's the first step?" Zareth panicked. Queens did not panic. She forced herself to think. What was the first thing humans did in these ridiculous rituals? Her golden eyes flickered to his lips. She had seen humans touch each other there in what they called a kiss. Was that where it started? Zareth's mind raced, but Ethan was waiting. His blue eyes watched her with an amused glint, as if he knew exactly what was happening inside her head. Zareth, refusing to look weak, made her choice. She stepped forward, closer than she ever had before. Ethan's smirk faltered slightly. Zareth grabbed his face. Ethan barely had time to react before she kissed him. The shock that changed everything. The moment their lips met, something exploded inside Zareth's mind. It was not power. It was not pain. It was something completely new. She had expected to feel nothing, maybe disgust or confusion. Instead, she felt warmth, A strange, thrilling warmth that spread through her chest, her arms, her entire body. She had fought wars. She had destroyed planets. And yet, nothing had ever made her feel like this. The moment she realized it, she ripped herself away, breathing hard. Ethan stared at her, wide-eyed. Well, that escalated quickly. Zareth turned away, furious at herself. This experiment is over. Ethan, still slightly dazed, wiped his lips and grinned. Oh, no way. That was just the first test. Zareth growled. I will hear no more of this. She stormed out of the lab. But no matter how far she walked, how deep into the corridors of her ship she went, she could not escape the feeling still burning inside her. She had made a mistake. She had felt something, and now she was afraid. A queen in crisis. Zareth did not leave her chambers for an entire day. She meditated. She ran logical scans on her brain, trying to find a reason for her reaction. Maybe a chemical imbalance, a foreign pathogen. But the truth was far worse. She was not sick. She was not infected. She had felt, and she could not stop thinking about it. Ethan's warmth, the way his heartbeat had quickened, the way her own body had responded against her will. Zareth clenched her fists. This was wrong. She was not human. She was not weak. And yet, when she closed her eyes, all she saw was his face. The unavoidable meeting. When Zareth finally emerged from her chambers, she found Ethan waiting. He was leaning casually against the corridor wall, sipping from another cup of that strange coffee humans loved. Ah, she returns, he said playfully. I was beginning to think my experiment broke you. Zareth glared at him. Enough of your foolishness. Ethan's smirk remained. You're avoiding me. Zareth stiffened. Xenfar, do not avoid. Ethan shrugged. Then look me in the eye and tell me you felt nothing. Zareth opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan saw the hesitation and grinned. Thought so. Zareth's hands clenched into fists. She had to end this. She had to prove, once and for all, that this human's words were meaningless. And so, she did something even more dangerous than before. She turned to him and said, Very well. If you think emotions are strength, prove it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. How? Zareth took a deep breath. You will show me. Ethan chuckled. What? Like a date? Zareth had no idea what a date was, but if it meant winning this ridiculous challenge, she would accept it. She lifted her chin. Yes. Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. Wait, are you serious? Zareth narrowed her eyes. I do not joke. Ethan blinked. Then, slowly, his smirk returned. All right then, Your Majesty. Let's see if I can make a queen believe in love. Zareth hated how confident he sounded, because for the first time in her life, she was no longer certain she would win. The moment she cannot deny. Zareth was at war, not against enemy fleets, not against rival empires. This war was different. This war was inside her. It raged in her thoughts, in her body, in the space between her mind and her instincts. It was a battle she was not trained to fight. And the worst part, she was losing. The growing storm. Zareth sat alone in her private chambers aboard the Xenfar flagship. The vastness of space stretched beyond the glass, stars burning cold and distant. She should have felt at peace, but instead, she felt trapped. She could still feel the echo of his touch, the memory of Ethan's lips against hers. It was wrong. It was unnatural. It was everything she could not stop thinking about. Zareth gritted her teeth, placing both hands on the metal table before her. She had tried everything to purge the distraction. Meditation, combat training, even direct neural recalibration. Nothing worked. Her body remembered him. Her mind could not escape him. And worst of all, she did not want to. This was weakness. This was a sickness. So why did it make her feel alive? The uninvited visitor. The door to her chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Zareth didn't need to turn around. She knew who it was. Ethan. Of course. The human was like a virus, persistent, unstoppable, and always showing up when she least wanted him to. He walked in with his usual arrogant confidence, the kind only a fool or a warrior would have. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me," he said, voice light, but laced with something deeper. Zareth did not turn. "I have no time for foolish human distractions." Ethan smirked. "Right. That's why you're sitting in the dark, brooding." Zareth's claws dug slightly into the table. This insolent human had no idea how dangerous he was playing. Ethan walked closer, stopping just beside her. His voice softened. "You're scared, aren't you?" Zareth froze. The words hit her like a shockwave. She was not scared. She was never scared. She turned her golden eyes to him, burning with defiance. A queen does not fear. Ethan held her gaze. He did not back down. And for the first time, Zareth realized. Neither did she. A test of strength. Ethan slowly reached out, his fingers just barely brushing against her arm. It was not forceful. It was not an attack. It was a choice. A silent challenge. Let go of the fear. Let go of the control. Zareth's body tensed. Her heart, a heart she had never truly listened to before, pounded violently against her chest. She could break him. She could kill him in an instant, and yet she did not move. She wanted to feel this. She did not pull away. For the first time in her life, she let herself be vulnerable. The moment that changed everything. Ethan let out a slow breath, as if he knew this was something fragile, something dangerous. "Zareth," he said softly, "you can keep telling yourself that love is weakness, that emotions make you vulnerable." He moved even closer, his warmth pressing against her cool skin. "But if that were true, you wouldn't be standing here right now." Zareth's claws flexed. She hated him for being right, hated him for seeing through her so easily. But more than anything, she hated that she wanted him. Then, without thinking, without planning, without stopping herself, Zareth grabbed him. And this time, when she kissed him, it was not an experiment. It was real. It was raw. It was undeniable. Ethan's breath hitched for only a second before he responded, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her closer. For a moment, the war in Zareth's mind went silent. For a moment, there was only him. And for the first time in her life, Zareth let herself loose. The aftermath. The moment she pulled away, reality crashed back in. Her breathing was unsteady. Ethan's hand still lingered on her hips. Zareth stepped back, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. This was not supposed to happen. This was dangerous. She was a queen of the HFY. And yet, as she looked into Ethan's human eyes, she realized. She was something else now. Something more. Something she could never take back. Ethan, still slightly breathless, gave her a knowing smile. "Still think emotions are weak?" Zareth did not answer. Because for the first time in her life, she had no answer at all. The impossible news. Zareth had faced war. She had conquered planets. She had broken enemies with her own hands. But nothing had ever made her feel fear. Until now. She stared at the glowing medical screen in front of her, her golden eyes unblinking, her body frozen. The data was wrong. It had to be. But no matter how many times she reran the analysis, the answer remained the same. She was pregnant. The impossible reality. Fenfar queens did not get pregnant. They did not mate. They did not reproduce in the primitive, emotional way humans did. Their species controlled genetics in sterile laboratories, selecting only the strongest DNA to ensure the evolution of their empire. This had never happened before. This should not have happened. Zareth pressed a clawed hand against the cold metal table in front of her, trying to steady herself. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. Was this a mutation? A sickness? A flaw? No, the medical scans were clear. The DNA was perfectly merged, her genetic code mixed with his, with Ethan's. The confession. Zareth stood outside Ethan's quarters, her fists clenched. She did not hesitate in battle. She did not fear death. And yet, right now, she could not bring herself to open the door. Because once she said the words, once she spoke this truth aloud, there would be no going back. She took a slow breath, steeled her mind, and entered. Ethan was sitting at a table, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of coffee, lost in thought. He looked up when he saw her, smiling as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. "Zareth?" he asked, sensing something was wrong. "What's going on?" She hesitated. The words felt heavy, stuck in her throat. Then, finally, she forced them out. "I am carrying your child." The silence that followed. Ethan froze. The spoon in his hand slipped, clinking against the cup. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Zareth hated the silence. It was worse than battle, worse than any enemy. Then, finally, Ethan let out a shaky breath. "Wait. What?" Zareth's fists clenched. "You heard me." Ethan stared at her, as if trying to process an impossible equation. "You're..." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Okay. Wow. That's a problem." Zareth finished for him. Ethan frowned. "That's not what I was going to say." Zareth narrowed her eyes. "Then what were you going to say?" Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. His face was still filled with shock, but there was something else in his eyes. Something Zareth had not expected. Not fear. Not regret. Something else. "It's incredible," he whispered. Zareth's heart skipped a beat. The storm that comes next. Before she could respond, an urgent alarm blared through the ship. A flashing red warning appeared on the console screen nearby. "Incoming transmission. Sci-Fi High Command." Zareth felt a chill crawl down her spine. They knew. They had discovered her secret. And they were coming. The demand of the Sci-Fi. Zareth stood before the holographic projection of her empire's highest leaders. They did not bow to her as they once did. Instead, their faces were filled with disgust. "This is unacceptable," the Supreme Overseer hissed. "You have tainted your bloodline with human weakness." Zareth's claws flexed, her body rigid with tension. "My decisions are my own." The Overseer's eyes burned into hers. "Not anymore. You will return to the capital immediately." Zareth's entire body went ice cold. She knew what this meant. They did not just want her back. They wanted to correct her. To erase what had happened. To remove the child. Zareth's pulse pounded in her ears. This was no longer about pride. No longer about proving herself. This was about survival. Not just her own, but her child's. The unbreakable choice. Ethan was already waiting for her when she returned to their quarters. He had heard the transmission. "They won't let you keep the baby," he said quietly. Zareth nodded. "They will do more than that. If I return, I will be stripped of my throne." Ethan took a deep breath. "Then we don't go back." Zareth snapped her head toward him. "You would abandon your people." Ethan shook his head. "No, but I won't let them hurt you." Zareth searched his face, trying to understand how this human, this tiny, fragile creature, could stand against an empire for her. And then she realized he was not weak. He never had been. And neither was she. She had spent her entire life believing emotions were a weakness. But now she understood the truth. Love was not weakness. Love was defiance. And she would not let her child be erased. The escape plan. Zareth turned to Ethan. "We leave at dawn." Ethan smiled. "Took you long enough to say it." Zareth narrowed her eyes. "Do not test me, human." Ethan smirked. Too late for that. For the first time in days, Zorith smiled back. Because she had finally made her choice. She was no longer just a queen. She was a mother. And she would fight for her child. No matter what it took. The War of the Heart. The HFY did not ask twice. Their fleets were already on the move. Massive warships cut through space, their engines burning with cold precision. The High Command had sent their orders. Bring the Queen back. By force, if necessary. Zorith knew what this meant. If she returned, she would be stripped of her title, her honor, her very identity. Her child would be taken from her. Her mind would be rewritten. Corrected. She could not allow that. She would not allow that. For the first time in her life, Zorith was not fighting for her empire. She was fighting against it. And she would not lose. The final decision. Inside the human research station, alarms blared. The radar screen flashed red, displaying the incoming Xenfar fleet. Zorith and Ethan stood at the command console, staring at the data. They'll be here in less than an hour, Ethan muttered. Zorith nodded. Then we leave now. Ethan turned to her. You're sure about this? Zorith met his gaze. I have never been more certain. She had once thought love was weakness, but now, as she felt her child's presence inside her, as she looked at the human who had risked everything for her, she knew the truth. Love was the only war worth fighting. The escape begins. The plan was reckless, dangerous, impossible, and yet it was the only chance they had. The research base had a single prototype stealth ship. Small, fast, undetectable. If they could reach it before the Xenfar forces landed, they might have a chance to escape the system undetected. But time was running out. As they sprinted toward the hangar, the first shockwave hit. The ground shook. The lights flickered. The Xenfar had arrived. The betrayal of a queen. As they reached the hangar bay, the massive steel doors began to groan open. Zorith froze. A figure stood waiting for them. Tall, cloaked in the royal insignia of the Xenfar. A face she knew too well. Commander Varax, her most trusted general. Her mentor. The male who had trained her since childhood. His glowing silver eyes locked onto her with cold disappointment. You have gone too far, my queen, he said, his voice like steel. Come with me now, and this can be forgiven. Zorith stood her ground. There is nothing to forgive. Varax stepped forward. You are infected. You are lost. I will bring you home. Zorith clenched her fists. Home, she repeated. You would call it home after what they planned to do to me. Varax's expression did not change. You broke the law. Zorith's eyes burned with fury. I broke the chains. A long silence stretched between them. Then, without a word, Varax raised his weapon. Ethan moved instantly, stepping in front of Zorith. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back. No, she said, her voice low. This is my fight. Ethan hesitated, but nodded. Zorith turned back to Varax. The air between them crackled with tension. Neither spoke. They had fought together. They had bled together. And now, they would fight against each other. The duel. Varax struck first. Fast, precise, deadly. But Zorith had been trained by the best. She dodged, countered, fought with the fury of a mother protecting her child. Metal clashed. Sparks flew. The hangar echoed with the sound of war. Varax was strong, but Zorith was stronger. With a final strike, she sent him crashing to the ground, his weapon skidding across the floor. She could end it. Right here, right now. But she didn't. Because she was no longer just a queen. She was something more. She turned away. You were my mentor, she said quietly. You taught me how to fight. She met his gaze one last time. And now, I fight for something greater than the Empire. Varax did not stop her as she turned and ran toward the waiting ship. Perhaps, deep down, He had always known this day would come. The final escape. As the engines roared to life, the hangar doors burst open. Xenfar soldiers swarmed inside. Zareth gripped the controls. There was no turning back now. Ethan strapped himself into the co-pilot's seat. If we die, I just want you to know, this was totally worth it. Zareth smirked. We are not dying today, human. With a final burst of power, the stealth ship launched into the sky. Explosions rocked the base below. The Xenfar warships moved to intercept, but they were too late. Zareth and Ethan vanished into the darkness of space. Free. For now. The price of rebellion. As they left the system, Zareth knew one truth. The Xenfar would not stop. They would hunt her. They would hunt her child. She had defied the Empire. She had broken the law of her people. She had chosen love over duty. And for that, she would never be forgiven. But she did not regret it. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, where new life grew inside her. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. Because now, she was no longer just Zorith, the queen of the Xenfar. She was Zorith, the mother of a new future. And she would fight until her last breath to protect it. The birth of a new future. The universe was silent. Zareth sat inside the small, hidden outpost on a distant moon, staring out at the endless stretch of space. The stars burned far away, cold and indifferent. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. No empire, no armies, no throne. But she was not weak. She was free. And soon, she would bring new life into the universe. Her hand rested against her stomach, feeling the pulse of something that should not exist. A child. Half Xenfar, half human. The first of its kind. The proof that love was stronger than war. The final shelter. The abandoned station they had found was barely functional. Rusted corridors, flickering lights, ancient technology barely holding together. But it was safe. For now. Ethan had done his best to make the place livable, setting up medical equipment, repairing what little power remained. But there were limits. They had no doctors. No advanced Xenfar medical technology. No help. Zareth would have to do this alone. And it terrified her. She had commanded fleets. She had fought warriors. But this was a battle she had never prepared for. The pain of change, the first contraction, hit like a shockwave. Zareth gritted her teeth, gripping the metal edge of the medical table. Ethan rushed to her side. Zareth, what's happening? Zareth glared at him. What do you think is happening, human? Ethan swallowed hard. Okay, right. Yeah, the baby's coming. Bah. What do I do? Zareth exhaled sharply. You will not panic. Ethan nodded quickly. Got it. Not panicking. Completely calm. Zareth growled as another wave of pain tore through her. You are panicking. Ethan winced. A little bit. Zareth grabbed his arm. You will not let anything happen to this child. Ethan met her gaze. His hand covered hers, firm and steady. I won't. Zareth had never trusted anyone more. The battle for life. Time blurred. The pain was unbearable. It was like her body was fighting itself, rejecting something that had never been meant to exist. Her vision swam. Her body trembled. Her mind screamed, this is wrong. This is unnatural. This is. No. This was hers. This child was hers. And she would not break. She was Zorith, queen of the Xenfar. She had defied the high command. She had defied the laws of nature. And she would not be defeated now. Not when she had fought so hard for this moment. The first cry. Ethan held his breath. Then, in the silence of the old station, a sound. Small, fragile, a cry. Zareth's chest tightened. She had faced death 1,000 times. But this was life. Ethan, wide-eyed, carefully wrapped the small, impossibly delicate newborn in his arms. Zareth, exhausted, breathing hard, could barely focus, until Ethan whispered, "It's a girl." Zareth's heart stopped. A girl. A daughter. Her daughter. Ethan gently placed the newborn into Zareth's arms, and as Zareth looked down for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to love, not as an idea, not as a weakness, but as something powerful, something worth dying for, something worth living for. The future they chose. Zareth traced a single clawed finger along the child's soft cheek. She had Zenfar eyes, glowing golden, but her skin was softer, her features human, a perfect blend of both worlds. She was the impossible made real, the first of her kind, the first of something greater. Ethan sat beside Zareth, his eyes soft. "She's beautiful." Zareth's voice was quiet. "She is more than that. She was hope. She was the future. She was the reason the Xenfar were wrong. The reason Zareth had chosen love over duty." Ethan looked at Zareth. "What will you name her?" Zareth thought for a long moment. Then, softly, she whispered, "Solara," a name born from two worlds, a name that meant light in the darkness, a name that meant freedom. The war is not over. Zareth knew the Xenfar would come for her. They would never stop hunting her. But now she had something to protect, and she would never stop fighting. For Solara, for Ethan, for the new future they had created together. She looked out at the stars, her daughter sleeping safely in her arms. A queen no longer. Now she was something stronger, a mother. And she would burn the universe down before she let anyone take her child away.